My views on the nature of existence are a bit complicated, so in this video, I'll be trying to unpack my ontological beliefs. I personally grew up in a fairly agnostic environment, so I was never really under the influence of any belief system. But when I started to get into philosophy, I almost immediately gravitated towards atheism because the alternative, Christianity, never really clicked with me, and this is for a few reasons. I would say that my first ever philosophical defense of my atheism was the Razor of Occam, which, if you don't know, states that the simplest answer is usually the correct one. And to say that the universe just is, and we just are, is a lot simpler than trying to loop God into all of it. Then I started to look into Christian theology more and began to uncover the immense amount of problems with the existence of God. Just to name a few: the problem of evil, the problem of animal suffering, the problem of natural disasters, atrocities in the Bible, contradictions in the Bible, the number of psychological and anthropic reasons humans always gravitate towards a belief in some sort of deity, etc., etc. One reason many Christian apologists give for the existence of God is that there must be some sort of purpose to the universe, or life without God is meaningless, and I personally think this is baloney. Just because we have a conscious experience and we can contemplate our death doesn't mean that the universe ought to have some purpose. It just means that we happen to develop consciousness for evolutionary reasons, and a side effect of that is that we have an intrinsic drive for knowing things and finding purpose in things. Now, just before I move on, I want to clarify that I have no problem with religion. I just think that if we're trying to find the truth, religion is just not where it is. Also, you'll know if you listen to my latest podcast episode, we talk a lot about the Old Testament and the atrocities such as slavery, the numerous amount of genocides. I mean, Christians don't call it genocides, but it basically is, right? And when you compare it to the New Testament, it's sort of like God is like a new character almost. It's like a lot of people say that the Old Testament is like Yahweh, and then the New Testament is like Jesus, right? And when you think of Jesus, you sort of think of this all-loving, caring fella who's saving people, right? But Yahweh sort of enslaves people, slaughters children, all this stuff, and it's not good, right? And the reason this flaw actually matters is that for a lot of good verses in the Bible, we're supposed to use our moral intuition to sort of deduce that it's good, right? And like William Lane Craig famously says that the Amalekite slaughter was justified.
As Rausser points out, that nothing could be more intuitively wrong to me in this regard than the killing of an innocent child.
I would say that it is wrong in the absence of a divine command, but that God has the ability to override that by issuing a divine command, which then becomes our moral duty.
And if we can't use our moral intuition and say that's completely bad, then how are we going to use our moral intuition for something else and say that's good? It's completely arbitrary. And if we're also to say that objective morals exist because God is all loving and created us, who's to say that the Old Testament is bad, right? If God is commanding genocide, if God allows slavery, who's to say slavery is wrong? And I don't necessarily know the Christian objection to this. It's just something to think about, But yeah, basically all of these facts compounded together sort of makes it like I'm not necessarily trying to find flaws in Christianity, but when I study Christianity and when I look at it, when I research Christian apologetics, it's just inevitable that I find these mistakes, and I can't help but think that there's a problem here, right? And also I believe that a lot of people believe in faith, particularly when they're in a slump, when their life is bad, when they just lost a loved one, something like that. They always turn at that moment. Why? Because when your life is at such a low point, it sort of bypasses all reason, and you sort of look for an answer and you sort of grasp onto anything you can hold. And it doesn't necessarily have to be true, but it just has to give you the reassurance that it is true. And that's why I think, for me, I haven't necessarily had an experience where I've had to resort to that. I'm thankful for that, but I think if ever I do convert, it would most likely be in a really tough time or some traumatic experience or whatever. And then I sort of have a religious experience that's sort of like a figment of my imagination. Now, if you've watched my cosmological argument video, you'll know that I think it is the best argument for God's existence. But a key distinction I make, and the reason I'm a deist, is that I believe in a necessary being. And I think God and necessary being are two very different things. A god, colloquially, is a divine creator who is all-loving and does things for a purpose. A necessary being, however, is simply just an uncaused cause, which is all-powerful. A necessary being does not give the universe any inherent purpose. It simply gives the foundation for existence of the universe. And I gravitate towards this belief because I believe science will never be able to explain things that exist beyond the universe, like how did the Big Bang start, or what's beyond the universe, right? Many deists believe that there is a God who created the universe for a purpose, but they just don't monitor what's happening inside the universe. And honestly, I could get behind this because technically there's no way to prove or disprove that, but I just think that the idea of giving things purpose is such a anthropomorphic way of viewing things, and just because we think things should have a purpose doesn't mean they actually do have a purpose. So that's sort of why I think I'm a deist who doesn't believe in any divine purpose. I don't know if there's a word for that, but that's sort of where I stand. And if I'm gonna be real, I would love to have a belief in God. I would say I'm more of a non-resistant non-believer, which basically means that I don't necessarily find reasons to disbelieve in Christianity, but I just can't help but look at the evidence and it's just like a subconscious thing where it's like, we know this is true and this is true and this is true, so we come to a conclusion. And for me, when I look at the evidence for atheism versus Christianity, I just can't help but think that Christianity cannot be true. So even though it may sound like in some of my videos that I sort of am a hardcore atheist, that's not true at all. I think if I was able to believe in God or Christianity, I think my life would be a lot better. I'm not gonna lie, and that's another problem of, I didn't actually mention this problem, but the problem of divine hiddenness. Why does God hide himself? Why does God willingly stay hidden from so many humans, right, on Earth? Couldn't he technically give all of us religious experiences and thus sort of give us the opportunity to believe in him, right? Because if I had like a real sort of vivid religious experience, I think it would definitely gravitate me towards belief in Christianity, because I think a lot of people do have religious experiences that can't necessarily be explained by science or anything. So it's sort of like a one-off thing. And also, I think I've mentioned this before, but the famous Christian apologist William Lane Craig says, when you have a religious experience, you cannot show other people that your religion is true just because you had a religious experience. You yourself can only know that the religion is true. So I'm just curious as to why God doesn't give us all the opportunity to have a religious experience. And it's just like little things like this that sort of add on to the impossibility of God's existence, in my opinion. In conclusion, Christianity is probably false, and I think I live my life sort of as an atheist, but my metaphysical view on the world is sort of stems from deism. So, that concludes the video. If you like the video, subscribe for more, and I'll see you on the next one.